So I don't know how well I'm going to come up on this video, but I thought I'd film it anyway. I figured if the lighting is so terrible, it's probably alright here. Check our mailbox. If the lighting is so terrible, I can very easily just save the audio and then put some still frames of relevant stuff in the video instead. But the main focus of this video is going to be on the death of Kentaro Miura and a little bit on the topic of unfinished works. So by an unfinished work, actually, since I've done a little bit of study on this, I've always had an interest, but I wanted to, since doing a little bit of study on it, I really want to make like a big full video about it because it is a very interesting subject, and you might be surprised of how many names are out there, how many very well-known classical like novelists, artists, composers, etc. have works that were just either never published because they didn't feel like the work was good enough for them, or they didn't publish because they unfortunately died before they could complete it. With the case of Kentaro Miura, the case is definitely that he died before he could complete it. He's also a little bit different from others in that with other people, other artists, novelists, writers, painters, whatever, the chances are that they published a heap of different works before they died, which means that their unfinished work before their death was just one of many things that they had worked on. Obvious examples being, I think Leonardo da Vinci has a few unfinished works. The Magic of Mija, I think it's called, is an unfinished painting of his. But also The Last Supper, his very famous painting of that, it was technically not finished, but he had finished the majority of it. So it was safe to say that what we see now of The Last Supper was pretty much what he had in mind. All that was really left to paint on that was the roof. He had already finished painting all the characters, etc. before his death. So you have examples like that, but you don't have a lot of examples like Kentaro Miura, where his work was, he had published other works, but very few that were like Berserk. I think the only one that even got an English translation was one called Japan, which he wrote in 1992. He wrote it in 1992. Berserk was still very young at that time. It's interesting because looking through the work of Japan, you can kind of see that at least back then you definitely had strong nationalistic feelings. I'm not sure if he had those during his later years, but in the early 90s he definitely did. Or at least it definitely seemed so in that work. But with the exception of that, Berserk was one of the only big projects he had. Even his next most well-known project, Japan, it was only a single volume. He was a manga artist, so they do it by a volume. It was only one volume. It was only something like, the 5 or 6 chapters that you would get within a manga. So he pretty much dedicated the majority of his life to working on this giant world that he was creating, which is incredible. You know, you can look at stuff like, you know, Berserk is comparable to things like Lord of the Rings in that there's this huge world, but there's so much detail put into it that you can really see that the guy had a vision of where he wanted it all to go. But unfortunately, he ran out of time before he was able to finish it. He did die of I believe it was acute aortic dissection, which is a cut or tear in one of the main blood vessels leading to and from the heart. Let's get off the road. Don't want to get run over. It's one that, you know, obviously most heart attacks are due to poor health, but an aortic tear, especially an acute one, that can really come out of nowhere. It can really be just a very quick, unfortunate thing, and you have, I mean, if a blood vessel goes and it's a main one, a main artery, you have minutes to respond. There's really not much you can do. So 54 years old he went. It's very young, especially for Japan. Japanese tend to live longer, but unfortunately with horrific things like this, he did not get to. It's hard to say whether he would have finished Berserk within his lifetime. It definitely seemed like the story was getting well underway in the last few chapters he had written. It seemed almost hurried in a way. I'm not sure if that's me just pulling at strings or seeing something that's not there. It probably is. But it seemed like within the last few years he had definitely put in a lot of work to progress the story towards not a conclusion, but in the direction of an ending. I know that for years and years, you know, I've been reading Berserk since I was a young teenager. It's probably been 13 years, and you know, there are people that have been reading his stuff since they were kids, you know, older than me. There are people in their 40s now who are reading and watching the Berserk anime when they were children, which is crazy to think about. You know, this is a cross-generational thing. There's probably 3 or 4 generations of people who grew up and were influenced by Miura's work. Definitely in the millions of people. And I remember there was a very large period of time where either a lot of the chapters were a bit fluff, or they weren't coming out at all. There was a big gap in chapters where I remember there was one point where I was completely caught up with the story, and I checked back 6 months later because I thought, oh well, there'll be a few new volumes out by then, because he's been updating so much, but there was just nothing. I checked back 6 months after that, no new chapters at all. And from there, I remember it was a long time before we got any new works in the Berserk universe. I don't know what was happening during that time. I didn't keep up that much with it. I usually don't keep up with behind the scenes of most things I'm interested in. I just enjoy what they are for what they are. It's actually very rare for someone to dedicate so much, or pretty much all of their adult life to this, and then to pass away not having finished it. Obviously there are examples of people who dedicated their life to things, but then the things they were dedicating them to were individual stories. So you would eventually, the person would die and they would have incomplete works, but the works were not part of a singular narrative per se. Like, you can look at, this is a silly example, but you can look at the work that was put into like the Anne of series, like Anne of Green Gables, Anne of all of that, and you can see that, yeah, it goes through all of this woman's life. Just about all of these different books tell a story of a different part in her life, but they're all individual stories. It's not like you have to it's not like they're all combined into one tale. You know, it's not just one story, it's all of the different stories of this woman's life, from her time as a young girl to her time as an old woman. And those books are very sad by the end, by the way. And they do definitely grow as time goes on, and the writer was getting better at telling stories. You can kind of see that with Kentaro Miura as well. His style of storytelling changed over time. You can read something like Band of the Hawk saga, and it's very different from his other sagas. But he never got to finish it, unfortunately, which is terrible because, you know, the dude definitely had a knack for it. It got me thinking of other unfinished works that we'll never get to see the end of. And there are a lot of unfinished works, but they kind of do have an ending. People have read the stories that in the Lord of the Rings series by Tolkien. Like, they could look at the manuscripts by Tolkien and then, or Tolkien, whatever you want to call him, and then they can piece together what they think his stories might have been. Like, Children of Horin is a very good book, but I don't think he published it himself. After he died, someone else finished off the book for him. Which obviously, you can't get word for word exactly what the person was going to put down on manuscript and into the finished work. You don't know if maybe they would have decided they weren't happy with it and changed it. But you can get an idea and finish off what was happening. However, you can say that about most of the great unfinished works too, though. You know, The Mysterious Stranger by Mark Twain, there's 3 almost finished manuscripts of that out there, and you can kind of piece together what the story was from there and make a coherent narrative out of it. But I don't think you could do that with Berserk. One thing I found very interesting is that most of the really famous composers had unfinished works, which shouldn't have been too surprising. I think I was just surprised how many of them were still writing music right up to the time of their death. The answer is most of them. I guess classical music, especially writing, is not something that, as long as your brain is active, you could still do it, so there's no real need to retire, especially if you have that love of it and the passion to do it. However, yeah, the works of Beethoven and Mozart's one of his most famous works are what is it? something in C minor. It's like high Cas or something, or high Cas. I don't remember exactly what it was, but if you heard the melody, you would definitely know what it was. But people did eventually figure out exactly, or get it pretty close to what he was going to publish himself, because most of the music was there. It was just missing kind of tone, and once you figure out, you can kind of piece together what the tone might have been, because you have a lot of his earlier works to go off of. And people posthumously finish these works that the artists put out, but with Kentaro Miura and Berserk, it's kind of hard to understand exactly what he would have done at the end. I'm not sure if he has like a sheet somewhere saying exactly what the ending was going to be. Like maybe Griffith goes for the uppercut and Casca kicks him in the ribs and he dies. I don't know. But it's almost, if he doesn't have something like that out there, then it's really impossible to say what his end goal might have been, which is a shame, because he's just, Kentaro Miura is one of the people who will never know what the ending of Berserk was, just like the rest of us. I think many people have waited a lot of their lives, some people the majority of their lives, to kind of find out, but you'll never know now. You'll never ever know, unless he has something somewhere kind of explaining it, which I don't know. I feel like if I was like that, I would not keep something somewhere with the original ending. It would all be in the mind. It would all be in my head. But obviously I'm not him. And I don't know what his process as an artist was. Maybe he did have a very clear goal at the end. He may have had a goal at the beginning for what his ending might have been, but who knows, it may have changed since then. He had been writing and working on Berserk for so many years, over 30 years. I believe he started in 1990, and I believe the Berserk prototype even is from 1988 or 89. It's like a remodeled version of the first chapter. But even then, it's really impossible to say. He may have had an idea of what he wanted the ending to the series to be back then, but he may not have. He may have changed his mind since then. You never know. It definitely seemed like Guts was leaning less away from the desire for revenge and more towards the longing for community, like what he had in Band of the Hawk, which it does kind of fit in with nationalistic points of view of healthy Christian communities and stuff, but I definitely don't think Miura was a practicing Christian. There's quite a few chapters in the Berserk saga which are very, very much anti-Christian. But he may have believed in that kind of community, family spirit deal, which a lot of people do. You can believe in it without belief in religion, especially in modern times. But it also seemed like there was always the story within it that the God Hand and Griffith were evil. And that even though Griffith was back and he was doing good things, he was still the evil person from before. But who knows, maybe the story may have changed. It may have changed to, well, Griffith is no longer evil. Since becoming a god, he's become benevolent, he's changed for the better, who knows. It's just hard to say. It's a real shame that we'll never find out what the ending was going to be, because even if they do find something and they publish a quick work posthumously, like an extra volume that quickly ties together all the story, who's to say that's what he wanted? Who's to say he wouldn't have changed his mind while creating the next chapters and gone with something else? You never know. But I do think I'm going to do another video, like maybe a nicely edited video, just on maybe a list of unfinished works and people's different artistic interpretations of them. I do think The Mysterious Stranger would be a very interesting one to do. There are quite a few of that. And Mark Twain is always a good author to make stuff about. I don't really make content on that kind of thing. This isn't the channel for it. But I do have a very great interest in it. So I'm nearing home now. There's actually a lot of cars around, surprisingly. Very surprised. I thought it would be pretty quiet tonight, but it gets busier and busier as the years go by, it seems. I used to remember you could walk out at night and there was never anyone about. Now there's cars and a howling wind. Times changed. But I definitely might make a video like that. It sounds like something that might be really fun to do. I don't know how many video views it would get. It seems like anything other than video game hunting and video game pickups, not a lot of people are interested in, but I do tend to make videos just based on what I want to make. And that'll be it. I think I collected my thoughts pretty nicely. I think I would consider Berserk as a whole work to be up there with some of the greatest unfinished works. However, it's very hard to compare it to others, because Berserk was something that it's not like a singular painting or a piece of sheet music. Berserk was so huge and took up so much of this guy's life. I had to kind of look into grand works to get stuff that was comparable, and I saw there were churches in Germany that took 600 years to build. But yeah, that's because back then they just didn't have the infrastructure or the knowledge in building to kind of build these great towers in the vision that they had seen fit. Or they ran out of funding, or they didn't have the means to because the country went to war, etc. So it's really hard to find anything quite the same as Miura's work. I'm definitely going to have to do some more research into it, but it does seem to stand in a class of its own. Well, rest in peace to the millions of people he inspired. It was a very sad day.